This is Lesson 12 in Module 6. This lesson is on security architectures. We will specifically focus on a discussion of the concept of defense in depth and zero trust approaches. We will also discuss how these approaches can also be used in an OT environment. We have just a few administrative comments. The first is that paper number 1 is due this Friday, 27 February by 11:59 p.m. Exam number 1 is next week. Just like quiz 1, it is asynchronous, which means you can take it any time next week. It covers modules 1 through 6, which covers lessons 1 through 12. It is worth 150 points. The questions will be true, false, multiple choice, multiple answer, and there will be a few short answer questions where you have to type in your answer and I'll have to grade them manually. There will be no review session on Tuesday night, 3 March, as well as no office hour that night. I'm going to be out of town. I will record an additional video to take the place of that session. If you have any questions about, for example, the exam or anything, I will be checking my email every morning and every night, but I'm not going to be maybe late at night, maybe midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning before I get back to you, but I will be checking things. And don't forget, spring break is coming up March 9 through 14. Let's start this lesson with a general explanation of what defense in depth means. Simply put, it means that you don't rely on a single layer of defense, but instead employ multiple layers. Should one layer of your defense infrastructure be breached, an attacker will still have to penetrate the next layer as well. The more layers that exist, the longer it will take to arrive at the target of the attack. Will the attacker want to expend this amount of time? While you hear this term today in reference to information security, the concept is much older. For example, castles in the medieval period employed a defense in depth strategy to defend what they considered was the most important resources or individuals. This diagram illustrates the concept of defense in depth using fortresses and castles. It also illustrates the fact that not everybody has the same amount of resources to expend on defenses, or the target may not be as important to others in all cases. Notice that even in the simplest of these examples, there are multiple layers of defense employed. There is a moat which will have to be crossed, then a fence which has only one gateway. There's also a hill that attackers will have to climb, slowing them and making them vulnerable to defensive fire from a wooden fort at the top of the hill, which will be the most secure area. The bottom example shows a more extensive defensive structure beginning with a moat, but then there are 2 walls, 2 gates, multiple towers, and the most secure portion, which is the most secure area and called a keep or a bastion. This is where the most important items will be stored for safekeeping. This includes both physical items such as money and jewels, as well as people. One other parallel with these castles and cybersecurity, someone who is inside the outer defenses, an insider, will have a much easier time accessing the most secure area behind all of the other defenses. The concept of a defense in depth strategy did not end when medieval castles were no longer relied upon for defense. A more modern example is the Maginot Line, which was constructed after World War I to defend France from an invasion by Germany. Notice the many different layers that extended well in front of the major portion of the citadel, as well as the main gun emplacements of various sizes that extended from the base of the citadel or bastion to the top. Most of this line was fully in place before World War II commenced. As we know from history, Germany was successful invading France despite the Maginot Line. What happened? Why didn't it work? The answer to this also has a direct analogy to cybersecurity. Germany didn't attempt to go through the line. They instead found weaker areas and went around the major citadels of the line. Cyber attackers will employ this same tactic. They won't necessarily try to breach the major defenses in your network, but will instead attempt to find a way around them, such as sending a phishing email, and having an employee who is inside of your defense run a program or click on a link that will provide a hole through or around your defenses. This picture is of soldiers entering a citadel of the Maginot Line. Various defensive measures are visible in this image. Today, the U.S. Army still utilizes the concept of a defense in depth. This is a diagram from the Army Field Manual 17-95, specifically Chapter 6 on defensive operations. We're not going to engage in a discussion of the diagram or the details of the strategy, but simply use this diagram to show that this concept is still in use today. One final thing we could benefit from looking at is the stated purpose of a defense in-depth strategy, as we have mentioned. Again, from Field Manual 17-95, the stated purpose has 5 parts, which are gain time, concentrate forces elsewhere, wear down enemy forces as a prelude to offensive operations, control key or decisive terrain, and retain tactical, strategic, or political objectives. While this list in the field manual is aimed at the physical elements of a battlefield, there are some direct corollaries to the security of IT and OT systems. For example, gain time. You want your defenses to cause the attacker to have to take considerable time in order to discourage them from attempting the attack, or else to give you time to spot their activity. An example of this is the use of strong passwords. To be able to guess a password through brute force will take a considerable amount of time if you employ good password strategies. In fact, if you have strong passwords, they will not be discovered during the lifetime of an attacker. Thus, their attack will fail. Another example is concentrate forces elsewhere, which the manual admits a defender is often forced to economize and accept risks elsewhere if they concentrate their forces at certain key locations. This is true for use in IT and OT security. We may choose to not put as many defenses around our public-facing website that is not used for access to internal networks or to sensitive data. The worst that could occur is that the website will be defaced, which may be considered an acceptable risk. Instead, you spend your time amassing your defenses around the sensitive internal network and the mission-critical systems, and employ more security controls for their defense. Let's now turn to a cyber version of the defense in-depth strategy. This diagram is from the Department of Homeland Security. Notice the various rings of security with different security controls in each. You have to pass the outer rings before you can get to the inner rings, with the innermost ring being where the attacker's target will reside. Notice that the rings include a number of different types of controls aimed at different aspects of your defensive strategy. For example, physical access controls are considered along with policies and procedures designed to ensure users follow good security practices. As you travel inward, you will encounter network security controls or devices, such as firewalls and intrusion detection systems, then security measures employed by the operating system, such as access controls. Even further towards the center, you may have additional security measures employed by the application that is used to access your sensitive data, or operational controls. If you do a search on Defense in Depth for IT systems, you will find a considerable number of diagrams, all of them basically illustrating the same concept. Here is another very simple one that you can find many versions of. Again, the concept is that you should employ defensive controls at each of the layers that an attacker will have to breach before gaining access to your important data or services. It should again be noted that several layers of this strategy can be circumvented if an attacker can convince an employee to take some action that would cause a way for them to enter the system. A common tactic is the use of phishing emails sent to employees. This is why user training is so important and can't be ignored. Here is another diagram of possible IT defense in-depth layers. This is very similar conceptually to the previous one, but has defined the rings differently. Another aspect of this that is very useful is the examples provided for security controls at each of the layers. In my opinion, this is a pretty good diagram explaining the possible rings of a cyber defense in-depth strategy. Here is one final diagram illustrating a defense in-depth strategy, this time for an OT environment. Notice that the concept is similar to our other diagrams, with the goal being to protect our important control systems by employing multiple rings of defense. The defensive layers shown on the right could be broken down into more distinct layers, but for now just recognize the concept is equally as applicable to an OT environment. NIST Special Publication 800-82, Revision 3, presents a 5-layer plan to implement an OT defense in-depth architecture. According to this document, the layers are as follows. Layer 1, Security Management. Security management, or governance, is the overarching cybersecurity program that supports the OT environment. These programmatic and organizational decisions will guide and impact the decisions made for the other defense in-depth layers. As a result, organizations should complete this layer before attempting to implement the other layers. Layer 2, Physical Security. Physical security measures are designed to reduce the risk of accidental or deliberate loss or damage to assets and the surrounding environment. Organizations may also need to consider additional environmental safety, regulatory, legal, and other requirements when implementing physical security. Layer 3, Network Security. Building from physical security, organizations should investigate network communications and how to protect the data and devices used to support their OT environment. These include applying the network architecture principles of segmentation and isolation, centralizing logging, network monitoring, and malicious code protection. Layer 4, Hardware Security. Hardware security protection mechanisms provide the foundation for supporting security and trust for the devices within an environment. Once device trust is established, the state must be maintained and tracked in accordance with the system, model, and policy. And Layer 5, Software Security. Software security protection mechanisms provide organizations with capabilities to ensure that applications and services supporting OT are used and maintained properly. Overall, software security capabilities can enhance endpoint security when organizations incorporate an application allow listing, otherwise known as whitelisting, patching, secure code development, and configuration management, including application hardening. Another strategy for securing your systems and networks is to implement a zero trust architecture. The basic idea behind zero trust is, as its name implies, you should have zero trust in any device, user, or system to begin with. Understanding that this is a good assumption for any entity coming from outside your organization is understandable and generally accepted. With zero trust, however, this applies to internal entities as well, which has not been universally accepted in the past. Many organizations, in order to make things easier, have implemented trust mechanisms such that once authenticated to one system in your network, then all others will accept an entity's trusted status. With zero trust, this is not done. Whether an entity is internal or external to the organization, it will not be implicitly trusted. All entities are considered hostile until access is explicitly authenticated and authorized. This applies to all resources. The American Council for Technology and Industry Advisory Council, or ACT-IAC, has identified 6 pillars necessary for zero trust security. Their model is depicted here. Users should be authenticated to ensure they are trusted and their trustworthiness should be continually monitored and validated. Devices in a similar manner should have their trustworthiness evaluated on an ongoing basis. Networks should utilize segmentation and isolation to ensure the trustworthiness of entities within. Applications need to be secured and properly managed in order to ensure their trustworthiness. This includes virtual machines. Automation specifically refers to security automation, orchestration, and response, or SOAR, S-O-A-R, devices, which will assist organizations with the automation of their tasks. And analytical tools should be utilized to allow security personnel to monitor the status of systems and networks to ensure their ongoing security status. This would include use of tools such as security information and event management, or SIEM tools, S-I-E-M. Splunk has provided in their guide to Zero Trust a short and useful cheat sheet highlighting aspects of Zero Trust that you need to employ to create a Zero Trust environment. This sheet can be used to help you with the establishment of a Zero Trust environment and to audit what you have implemented to ensure that all aspects of a Zero Trust environment have been implemented. I won't go through each of these, but I will point out that the first one, which emphasizes the basic premise of Zero Trust, that access to all resources and assets, which includes systems, applications, and data, should only be granted upon verification of the authenticity of the entity requesting access and their authorization to access the resource or asset. This diagram from TechTarget can be useful as you attempt to implement a Zero Trust environment or network. Notice that this diagram includes both a description of the step as well as tools that might be useful in implementing the step. NIST Special Publication 800-82 Revision 3 provides some specific recommendations when considering Zero Trust in an OT environment. As NIST describes them, these include: it should be noted up front that some OT components, for example PLCs, controllers, and human-machine interfaces, may not support the technologies or protocols required to fully integrate with a Zero Trust architecture implementation. As a result, a Zero Trust architecture implementation might not be practical for some OT devices. Instead, organizations should consider applying Zero Trust compatible devices, such as those typically found at the functionally higher levels of the OT architecture. Organizations may also want to consider whether any adverse impacts might occur, such as if the Zero Trust architecture solution increases the latency to respond to resource requests, or if one or more Zero Trust components become unavailable. Based on this analysis, organizations should consider adjusting the Zero Trust implementations to minimize latency and ensure adequate redundancy to minimize risks to OT and safety operations. Another important aspect of Zero Trust architectures implementations is the identity of person and non-person entities accessing resources. Within OT environments, shared credentials may be utilized, which could impact the ability to fully implement a Zero Trust solution. And organizations may not find a suitable single solution for a Zero Trust architecture and may instead need to integrate several technologies with varying maturity levels to support their environment. Both the defense in depth and the Zero Trust strategies have associated benefits and challenges. In terms of the benefits, both employ a multi-layered security posture, with defense in depth very overtly emphasizing this, while Zero Trust applies this by having every access verified, so that an attacker would not be able to access one system to gain access to internal data, but would have to authenticate again. In essence, multiple layers of security would exist. Both also rely on an improved level of visibility and control to ensure that ongoing activity remains authorized and resources remain secure. Resilience can also be argued as a benefit of the architecture, as a whole system will not fail if a single layer is breached. Both strategies also rely on a reduced attack surface in that each layer or pillar can focus on a limited set of issues that exist within the layer or pillar. Both strategies also face a variety of challenges. This includes complexity in terms of implementing and managing the strategies. There is also a potential performance impact if an authorized user has to go through multiple layers of security before being able to access the system, application, or data they need for their job. Changes within the IT or OT environment can also introduce a challenge in terms of managing introduction of the change to either strategy. With the potential for a possible impact in performance and with increased security controls, stakeholder buy-in may also be a challenge. This is especially true if you are modifying your existing environment to introduce one of these security strategies. Finally, there is always the issue of balancing security with operational requirements. You want the environment to be secure, but security should never make the mission of the organization difficult to accomplish. There are some best practices that can be employed for either strategy that will make implementation a bit easier. The first is to introduce a phased implementation of the strategy. You don't want to overnight drop a lot of new requirements on your users they will have to deal with. For an OT environment, which may have constraints not normally seen in an IT environment, careful adaptation of IT security concepts to the OT environment should be carefully conducted. As mentioned, both strategies rely on continuous monitoring and adjustment, as well as personnel training for a smooth introduction of either approach. Here is a list from Fortinet on specific issues or challenges that your security strategy and program needs to consider. These are commonly seen in organizations across the country. Anti-malware software is either not being used or has not been updated on a regular basis. This software should be designed to protect all systems in the organization. Employees, as has been alluded to several times, can create a path around your security controls attackers can exploit. You need to ensure all users are trained on things such as common phishing attacks. We are all familiar with software patches, but has your organization ensured that they are employed and are not ignored? Security policies are a bedrock for an organization's security program, but having policies which are never enforced are fairly useless. To hold your users responsible for adherence to policies, however, they need to know what they are and what is expected of them. Encryption is an extremely useful security measure that can protect data at rest and in transit. Are you utilizing it to do so, and are you using strong encryption algorithms? We have seen an increase in remote employees working from home and thus connecting to our networks. Additionally, they are likely also connecting to other unsecured networks and may in fact infect their own systems. This in turn can result in your organization's networks becoming infected as well. We can't ignore physical security. If an attacker can gain physical access to our systems, especially our servers, then there is a very good chance we can be compromised. Finally, a growing concern now being realized because of some significant breaches is that of business partners and vendors. Supply chain security is vital because we often grant privileges to our vendors, and if they are not secure, then our own networks can become compromised because of security issues in their systems. As a final comment on these challenges, It is not uncommon for more than one of these to be present at the same time. In fact, for organizations with poor security and no focus on it, they could be facing all of these challenges at the same time. While the two security architectures already discussed are popular in the security community today, there are other architectures and frameworks that have been and can be used. These include the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and their Risk Management Framework, which we have mentioned. Both of these have been successfully used to implement a cybersecurity program within an organization. Both can also be combined with either defense in depth or zero trust strategies. We mentioned ISO/IEC 27001 earlier, but did not go into any detail on it, as the 27000 series of documents are copyrighted and are not freely available. Having said that, it is important you have heard of them, as they are international standards that a number of organizations in industry utilize. Another architectural framework which we have not mentioned before is the Open Group Architecture Framework, or TOGAF, or TOGAF. It is a business architecture that incorporates security elements in the framework. Where you concentrate your security efforts can vary. The architecture of application security focuses on the integration of security controls into software applications. This approach is especially important to organizations that design and implement their own code. With the increased use of cloud computing, the architecture of cloud security might be applicable in many organizations. The focus of security in this architecture are the rules and practices specifically for cloud systems. Before moving on, it should again be emphasized that these are not exclusive approaches, but can be combined as you implement your own programs. I just mentioned the Open Group Architecture Framework, or TOGAF. The architecture is a bit different from the other architectures we discuss. It is a framework for enterprise architecture. It is available freely for anybody to use. More information on it can be found at the website indicated on the slide. The reason that this framework is different from other architectures we've mentioned is that it addresses 4 architecture domains. Taken from the Open Group's description of the framework, these 4 domains are: the business architecture defines the business strategy, governance, organization, and key business processes. The data architecture describes the structure of an organization's logical and physical data assets and data management resources. The application architecture provides a blueprint for the individual applications to be deployed, their interactions, and their relationships to the core business processes of the organization. And the technology architecture describes the logical software and hardware capabilities that are required to support the deployment of business, data, and application services. This includes IT infrastructure, middleware, networks, communications, processing, standards, etc. Of course, what we are interested in is security, and especially risk management. Notice that neither security nor risk management was mentioned in the description of the architecture domains. This framework is designed for the entire business, not just security. This doesn't mean that they ignore security, but they focus on the business first. Many of the items they mention as part of these other domains will help when we get to implementing a risk management program. Mitigation planning and risk management are introduced in this framework in Part 3 of the document that covers the Architecture Development Method, or ADM, guidelines and techniques. Specifically, these are covered in Chapter 24 and 27 of the document. The chapter on mitigation planning is not aimed at security, but rather general risks and factors that impact some aspect of the architecture. Remember that we said a cyber risk is a business risk. The chapter discussing risk management also does not specifically address cybersecurity, but the methods are similar to other methods and processes we've discussed. The standard describes a risk management process consisting of 5 activities. As I go through these, taken directly from the document, think about how this process compares with others that we may be familiar with and have discussed. The activities are risk classification. It is useful to classify the risks so that the mitigation of the risks can be executed as expeditiously as possible. Risk identification. Maturity and transformation readiness assessments, accomplished in an earlier domain, will generate a great many risks, identify the risks, and then determine the strategy to address them throughout the transformation. Initial risk assessment. The next step is to classify risks with respect to effect and frequency in accordance with scales used within the organization. Combine effect and frequency to come up with a preliminary risk assessment. Risk mitigation and residual risk assessment. Risk mitigation refers to the identification, planning, and conduct of actions that will reduce the risk to an acceptable level. Once a mitigation effort has been identified for each one of the risks, reassess the effect and frequency, and then recalculate the impacts and see whether the mitigation effort has really made an acceptable difference. Risk monitoring. The residual risks have to be approved by the IT governance framework and potentially in corporate governance where business acceptance of the residual risks are required. Once the residual risks have been accepted, then the execution of the mitigating actions has to be carefully monitored to ensure that the enterprise is dealing with the residual rather than the initial risk. In conducting the risk assessment, a qualitative approach is described using terms similar to ones discussed in cybersecurity. The potential impact of an event is categorized as catastrophic, critical, marginal, or negligible. The frequency of occurrence is indicated as frequent, likely, occasional, seldom, or unlikely. The risks are then classified as extremely high risk, moderate risk, or low risk. The chart shown here is figure 27-1 from the referenced documentation. It is similar to other qualitative methods used in cybersecurity. The different potential levels of impact of an event are listed under the column entitled Effect. The frequency levels are listed above their respective columns. When the impact and frequency are calculated, it will result in a specific level of risk. E for extremely high, H for high, M for moderate, and L for low. The chapter contains another chart that can be used with their methodology or any of the other qualitative methods seen in cybersecurity. The first column lists the specific risk with the ID you are using for it. Then across the next 3 columns, the values you arrived at for the effect, frequency, and impact for the initial assessment. The next column provides space for you to add the mitigation activity you will use to address the risk. Then the effect, frequency, and impact for the residual risk are inserted. This is a great way to keep track of your mitigation activities and how they have impacted your risk. Note that a residual risk for one risk ID may in turn become a new risk ID and will be listed as the preliminary risk for another iteration. You can then apply an additional mitigation activity and calculate the new residual risk. You can keep doing this until the residual risk reaches an acceptable level. One final note, the terms they use here don't exactly match the terms we often see in cybersecurity. I would be inclined to substitute impact for effect and risk for impact. Thus, risk becomes a factor of an impact and a frequency. The security architectures discussed in this lesson are equally as applicable to the OT environment as they are to IT environments. For example, Well, here's a diagram that illustrates the different layers or levels of security that a defense in depth approach to OT security might employ. The idea is the same as with an IT environment. At each layer or level, additional security controls are employed to further secure the important process being protected at the lowest layer. A zero trust architecture can also be an approach to security taken in an OT environment. Having said that, there are some unique challenges pointed out by Microsoft that you may face in an OT environment, including OT systems may not be designed for multiple users and role-based access policies and may only have simple authentication processes. OT systems may not have the processing power available to fully apply secure access policies and instead trust all traffic received as safe. Aging technology presents challenges in retaining organizational knowledge, applying updates, and using standard security analytics tools to gain visibility and drive threat detection. Microsoft also included some recommendations when applying zero trust principles to OT networks. Make sure that all connections between networks and devices are identified and managed. Segment your network to limit data access, ensuring that all communication between devices and segments are encrypted and secured and preventing lateral movement between systems. Evaluate signals like device location, health, and behavior using health data to gate access or flag for remediation. And finally, continue to monitor security metrics such as authorized devices and your network traffic baseline to ensure that your security perimeter retains its integrity and changes in your organization happen over time. Earlier, I mentioned in passing two devices, SIEM and SOAR. SIEM, SIEM, stands for Security Information and Event Management. SIEM combines Security Information Management and Security Event Management into one system. SIEM devices are designed to collect, correlate, and analyze security event data from various sources to provide insights into potential security issues, but offer a different level of automation for incident response. SOAR stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. SOAR devices are used in automating and coordinating security incident response. SOAR platforms are known for their ability to integrate with a wide range of security tools and technologies. Both devices are increasingly being used to help organizations with the ongoing monitoring and security management of networks and systems. You will especially see them in use in security operations centers, or SOCs. Here is the new list of useful documents for your library. We've only added one, NIST Special Publication 800-82, Revision 3, which is the Guide to Operational Technology, or OT, Security. For this lesson, there is one reading assignment, NIST Special Publication 800-82, Revision 3. This document is just over 300 pages long, and I'm not asking you to read the entire document. Instead, skim the document to get a feel for what it contains, and then take a look at Chapter 4 of the document, which covers risk management in OT systems. This chapter covers pages 44 to 65. Also examine Appendix F, OT Overlay. This appendix provides overlays for OT systems looking to implement the security controls found in NIST Special Publication 800-53. This will be your introduction to controls we will talk a lot more about in a while. There are also two required videos. The first covers 5 cybersecurity architecture principles to follow and 1 to not observe. The first of the principles is Defense in Depth. The second required video is a short explanation of zero trust. There's also one optional video that discusses zero trust. It is time now for our knowledge review. Which of the following were mentioned in Field Manual 17-95 as a purpose to implement a defense in-depth strategy? select all that apply. Gain time, concentrate forces elsewhere, wear down attacking forces as a prelude to offensive operations, control key or decisive terrain, or confuse/mislead attacking forces. The answer is all of these except confuse/mislead attacking forces. Select the correct order of defenses for the rings in a cyber defense in-depth strategy. Core operational services, operational system security, perimeter controls, access controls, people and policies, application security, network architecture components, and host security. What's the order for these? The correct order, starting from the outermost ring first, are perimeter controls, access controls, peoples and policies, network architecture components, operating system security, host security, application security, and in the center, core operational services. According to NIST Special Publication 800-82, Revision 3, what aspect of security goes with which layer for an OT defense in depth architecture? Match the items on the right with their layer. The answer is layer 1 is security management, layer 2 is physical security, layer 3 is network security, layer 4 is hardware security, and layer 5 is software security. Which of the following is not one of the 5 steps in the TOGAF or TOGAF defined risk management process? Risk classification, risk identification, initial risk assessment, risk mitigation and elimination, or risk monitoring. This is not the exact 4th step. We've discussed this before. We can't expect to eliminate all risk. You may be fortunate and actually eliminate some risks, but the risk management process is all about reducing risk to an acceptable level, not eliminating all risk. The actual 4th step is risk mitigation and residual risk assessment. This is what we accomplish in this step. We incorporate mitigation activities that will reduce the risk, resulting in a residual risk. We then take a look at the residual risk and decide whether it is at an acceptable level. If it is acceptable, we stop with that risk and move on to the next. If it isn't, we need to add other mitigation activities or modify the ones so it is more effective, or they are more effective. We continue this process until the risk is at an acceptable level. This is the end of Lesson 12 found in Module 6. This is also the end of Module 6.